Hello and welcome to Yes, Those Were Words, where, yes, we are talking about Doctor Who again. You might groan, but the reason why I keep bringing this show up is because Doctor Who is such a unique science fiction show, even in the modern day era. Okay, it might not have the same flair as the original series, but once in a while the show accomplishes to present a story that can still capture the attention of even the most curmudgeon of fans. The best example I can think of is, obviously, Heaven Sent, a fantastic episode featuring the Doctor, played by Peter Capaldi, and nobody else save for a silent monster. It has a fantastic atmosphere, Capaldi sells the Doctor's emotional struggle, given what happened in the previous episode, Face the Raven, and it builds up to what is surely going to be a climactic encounter with his captors. And then Hellbent happened. But that is neither here nor there. The point is, Doctor Who is still an amazing show, and I'll keep watching it just to see what happens next, even if the story in question is terrible. And hey, plenty of people must have the same opinion because the show is still going on in spite of the incident. What am I referring to? Well, to understand, we'll need a change in scenery. Alright, class, sit down and open your Doctor Who history books to Chapter 1. The show had just been created in 1963 and was winning over the United Kingdom by storm in spite of a lukewarm reception. William Bill Hartnell continues to play his role as the Doctor for the next 3 years until 1966. When his health took a noticeable nosedive. Suffering from arterial sclerosis, his ability to remember the script came to the point where he needed cue cards to remember his lines. Thus, the concept of regeneration was born. We cover this briefly in Chapter 8, but we'll go over it again for those who are absent. Regeneration is when a Time Lord completely changes their body and personality after being killed. This is a convenient way of replacing actors who have left the show due to various circumstances. This was first implemented in The 10th Planet, William Hartnell's final episode, and the debut of the Cybermen. Now, we'll skim over the next few chapters until we reach chapters 5 through 6. Patrick Troughton takes over for William and does a pretty good job, judging from what little I've seen due to most of the old serials being thrown in the Great Stupidity fire of the mid-1960s. After a brief hiatus, John Pertwee takes over and brings more color to the show, both metaphorically and literally. Then, after Planet of the Spiders, Tom Baker takes over and practically stole the show. After 7 years of mostly fantastic stories, Tom Baker finally steps down and Peter Davison takes over as the 5th Doctor. This is where things began to slowly decline for the show, not at all due to Peter's portrayal as the Doctor, but rather due to BBC One's show controller at the time, Michael Grade. As controller of BBC One, Grade could pretty much decide whether a show could live or die, and boy did he want to kill Doctor Who. He would later state in interviews that he viewed the show as outdated and violent, even though the show had always had violence in it, even back in William Hartnell's day. He would even go on to say that he outright hated the show and the genre of science fiction. Production of Peter's episodes ranged from passable to what in the wide world of sports were you thinking, with the most prominent example being the rushed, chaotic mess that was Warriors of the Deep, a story which had been rushed due to Margaret Thatcher announcing a surprise parliamentary election in the UK. Which cut the production time of the story by 2 weeks, due to the BBC needing a time slot to show the election on television. This is noticeable by looking at the costume for the monster known as the Merca, which reeked of paint and glue that had barely dried. This was the most prominent example used by Michael Grade to make his point about Doctor Who being dated, even though the team behind Doctor Who was not at fault for the story or its production. Regardless, after Peter Davison left and the new actor took over, Michael took the show off the air for about 18 months, a move that angered most fans. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning of Chapter 6 of Doctor Who history, or as I like to call it, the era of Colin Baker. After appearing in the Arc of Infinity as Commander Maxwell, the actor donned the role of the Doctor after Peter Davison decided to leave the show upon Patrick Troughton's advice. Colin's portion of the series began with a foul start with the infamously terrible story, The Twin Dilemma, which featured a freshly regenerated Doctor losing his mind and strangling his companion, alongside terrible writing and overall poor production. This would further fuel Grade's hatred for the series, which the controller would now say was further tainted by Colin's absolutely god-awful acting, prompting him to put the series on the aforementioned 18-month-long hiatus. Fans interpreted this as, "Oh god, someone's trying to kill Doctor Who!" and immediately began to panic. Even the actors were somewhat unsure about the staying power of the show, and tried to generate some attention by performing a charity single called Doctor in Distress, which was, well, needless to say, it was not exactly a popular song at the time. Eventually, the show returned for a 14-episode-long story arc called Trial of a Time Lord, in which an enigmatic entity called the Valeyard summons the Doctor to be tried by his fellow Time Lords for the crime of altering the course of history through his adventures. It was an interesting meta-reference to the fact that the show itself was, in a sense, on trial. One can argue that the Valeyard was a representation of Michael Grade, while the Time Lords represented BBC's elite. Regardless, the story arc was not as well received as many hoped, and Grade went for the kill. He demanded that Colin Baker was to be fired, otherwise he would not commission any more episodes of Doctor Who. This saddened Colin, as he always dreamed he could be as popular as Tom Baker, if not even more so. He was offered an ultimatum by the BBC's head of series and serials, Jonathan Powell, to do at least 4 more episodes including Time and the Ronnie, the episode where the Doctor would regenerate. But Colin, angered by the idea of just going through the motions and fitting into the show's plans before he was killed off, told Powell what to do with his idea. Thus, we were left with the infamous beginning scene in Time and the Ronnie, where Sylvester McCoy is seen wearing Colin's costume and a blonde wig to give the illusion that the Doctor was regenerating. This regeneration wasn't even caused by a deadly circumstance, giving way to the bump on the head joke. And we haven't even touched the more personal agenda of Michael Grade. It has been noted by Doctor Who magazine in an interview with production manager Gary Downey that Colin had been married to actress Liza Goddard, who was also a close friend of Michael Grade. Quelle coïncidence! Colin and Liza went through a bitter divorce, and Liza went to live with Michael until she had gotten over the divorce. Downey refused to say anything more on the matter, but it can be easily interpreted what happened next. Colin getting fired was probably an act of passionate vengeance from Michael, who was now dating Liza, though this is yet to be fully verified. In either case, it was with a heavy heart that Colin walked away from Doctor Who, scorned, defeated, and known as the worst version of the Doctor ever put to film. Which brings us to the ultimate question. Is Colin Baker truly the worst version of the Doctor in the history of the show? Well, in my honest opinion, no. Not by a long shot. While his televised series has certainly been marred by flawed writing, rushed production, and behind-the-scenes meddling, none of this is Colin's fault. Colin was excited to play the role, and was giving the best performance he could supply with what little he was given. It's not his fault that his Doctor was written like a snarky, temperamental, childish man who suffered from psychological meltdowns. He just played the role he was given regardless of the quality, as would any actor in Colin's position. And here's the thing. With decent writing, Colin can give a great performance as the Doctor. Those of you who watch my review of the Doctor Who TV movie know that I'm a fan of Paul McGann's performance thanks to a website called Big Finish Productions, a British company dedicated to producing books and audio plays for various projects, with a great chunk of their library dedicated to Doctor Who. Not only has Paul McGann gotten a chance to make more adventures for his Doctor, but so has Colin Baker and most of the other Doctors. I took a look into Colin's adventures after listening to some of Paul's, and I must say that I am thoroughly impressed. Here are some of the stories I've listened to. The Marian Conspiracy was one of the first adventures featuring Colin Baker for Big Finish Productions, and it also features the debut of a companion known as Evelyn Smythe, played by the late Maggie Stables, a history professor who acts as the yin to the Doctor's yang, being more grounded and mature than the Time Lord. It's a story about one of Evelyn's ancestors suddenly disappearing from history, thus causing her to vanish as well. The Doctor and Evelyn must travel to 16th century London and find out what connections Evelyn has to Queen Mary. This is a fantastic historical adventure featuring a notable figure in English history, acting as both an educational journey and an overall interesting adventure. Also, the relationship between the Doctor and Evelyn is fantastically executed by both the script and the overall acting, with Evelyn being somewhat of a stern parent to the Doctor at first, until their relationship develops more over time. Project Twilight comes next to mind, taking the Doctor and Evelyn to southeast London in the present day, where they discovered mutilated animal corpses, a casino fraught with mystery and deception, and a dark secret hidden in the cellar. In the process of solving whatever is going on, the Doctor must forge an uneasy alliance with the oldest enemy of the Time Lords, while Evelyn must keep a poor waitress named Cassie Schofield alive. This is another fun, if not dark, adventure that reveals a little bit of the history of the Time Lords and shows how even the Doctor can be prejudiced when it comes to certain species. It's a story that starts out calm and chipper, but slowly descends into a dark, dark place. Jubilee is an amazing example of a Sixth Doctor story because it was brought back for the modern day series. So, who remembers the 2005 episode simply known as Dalek? Yeah, you know the one. The return of the Daleks after 17 years, featuring Christopher Eccleston as the Doctor with Billie Piper as his companion Rose Tyler, the one where the sole surviving Dalek is being tortured for the amusement of its sick captors? Well, Colin Baker did the same story 2 years prior. The story is somewhat similar, but instead features the Doctor and Evelyn being trapped in a temporal paradox caused by the TARDIS setting them into both the far past, where the Daleks invade the United Kingdom, and the distorted future caused by alternate versions of the Doctor and Evelyn helping England win the war. It's also where the last living Dalek is being tortured in order to speak on the day of its execution, the Day of Jubilee. This is a mad adventure full of wonderfully dark elements, and it is not something Dalek copy and pasted from. Jubilee is its own story and is absolutely wonderful to listen to. Project Lazarus acts as a somewhat direct sequel to Project Twilight, which means this description will include minor spoilers. I'll put a time card somewhere in the video just in case you want to skip this one and not spoil Project Twilight. Anyways, Project Lazarus features the return of Cassie Schofield, who has been waiting for the Doctor to return with a cure for her vampirism. But she has waited too long, and an old friend has returned to offer her and the Doctor a better deal. He offers a place where science fiction shall become reality. He offers the Forge. This story follows a similar structure to Project Twilight, where things will appear to be calm and peaceful until a plot twist turns the story down a dark path. It even features a rare encounter between the Sixth Doctor and Sylvester McCoy as the Seventh Doctor, as indicated by the cover. So now we have two great actors portraying their versions of the same character, and they work off one another very well. Everyone gives an amazing performance, especially Colin and Maggie as the Doctor and Evelyn. There's a moment at the middle of the story I won't spoil, but it's one of those rare moments where the Doctor and a companion cannot just shake off what just happened on their adventures and go off into the next story. They reach a breaking point, and it feels so depressing to listen to, considering how closely knit these two feel as characters. Project Lazarus is a sad story, that I highly recommend so long as you have heard Project Twilight. So as you can see, Colin Baker can be an amazing doctor in spite of his past, much like Paul McGann. It goes to show you that, if given the proper chance, an actor can fit the role they were given. And this principle still applies to the modern series. People are still worried about the direction Doctor Who will go now that a woman has been casted in the role. But I am willing to give Jodie Whittaker a chance, much like how I was willing to give Colin Baker and Paul McGann a chance. Maybe her stories will surprise us, maybe they won't. But I am still hoping that this Doctor will impress us, regardless of the state of production of her stories. And if her on-screen stories fail, maybe Big Finish can succeed instead. Who knows? All I know is that I'm excited to see what will happen next, and I will always appreciate what happened in the past, even if there were some dark periods here and there. In the meantime, though, never stop rambling. This has been Rambles and Mumbles of a Nerd, and I thank you very much for watching this episode.